And away we go. All right. So to start with, just a little brief background on who Zyxel is. I realize we are not a household name. So I guess we'll start with it is pronounced Zyxel. I know Jacob doesn't pronounce it that way, but it's Zyxel. We've been making computer networking equipment now for 30 years. We've got a little over 100 million devices deployed out in the field, and we operate in 150 different global markets. Our business is segregated into 3 different categories. Stuff that's aimed at the telco and service provider space, which is the core of our business. Our business products, which are what we sell through the channel. And then we've got a small selection of consumer home product. It's a little bit more widespread in other countries than in the U.S. We do have a few of the products here in North America. The company itself is based out of Taiwan. Our headquarters for the U.S. is here out of Anaheim, California. We've got 2 buildings here. This operates as our sales, our warehouse, and it's also our tech support. So if you call in and need to talk to somebody to get some help, you are reaching an actual Zyxel employee that's actually working here with us. It's not outsourced to a third-party call center. It's not outsourced overseas. You are talking to somebody here. The big thing that makes us different than some of the other guys out there, maybe the TP-Links, the Netgears and stuff, is we have a very large dedicated R&D team. We've got over 500 engineers involved in either hardware or software engineering that work directly with Zyxel. Our main R&D is out of Taiwan, but we also have facilities in Santa Clara, California, and in Germany. So when we start looking at the products that are available through the channel, we break those down into a couple different categories here. We've got security appliances, wireless LAN, switches, hospitality gateways, and network management. So we'll be going through each of these, or most of these, one at a time as we go through today. We'll start off by talking about security products. So one thing I do want to highlight here is something called the ICSA Labs. They're an independent testing company that's been around forever. They can test VPN security and also firewall gateway functionality. So we have been continuously ICSA certified on our Zywall and USG products for 15 years now with no lapses. So our security portfolio is broken down into 4 different series. The first one is our VPN series. These products do not offer UTM functionality. They're strictly a firewall product that's optimized for high speeds through the firewall and for supporting lots and lots of VPN tunnels. The USG series is our UTM series, very similar to the VPN series, although these are optimized for providing UTM functionality. So that's antivirus, content filtering, et cetera, through the gateway. So a little bit slower, but they're offering a lot more security services for you. We have the ATP series, our Advanced Threat Protection, and we'll have some dedicated slides on that. It's a new way of handling network security that offers really high throughput and really aggressive security, specifically aimed at zero-day threats. And then we've got our NSG series. Our NSG series is our cloud-managed security gateways. They offer some basic UTM functionality, but they're managed to the cloud and offer a more streamlined experience, making them easier to configure, easier to manage, but maybe missing out on a few of those advanced features that are available in the other series of products. So most of our products offer what we call 4-tier high availability. All of our security gateways have dual OS and dual firmware support. So if something happens to corrupt the firmware during a firmware upgrade or something like that, no worries. We'll simply fall back to the last working firmware or configuration that was there for you. We all offer multiple WANs, the ability to do load balancing, failover, et cetera, through multiple WANs. We have device high availability. You can set up multiple gateways, so if one gateway has a hardware failure for some reason, the other gateway can take over automatically. And we offer VPN high availability as well. So it covers pretty much all the bases. Now, when it comes to UTM, we do it a little bit differently than most of our main competitors. Rather than trying to do this all in-house, instead what we've done is we've gone out and partnered with some of the bigger names in the industry that are focused on these categories. So antivirus signatures are provided by Bitdefender, Anti-spam and content filtering is provided by Siren. IDP and application intelligence we get from Trend Micro. So let's talk briefly about application awareness. The typical way you control your firewall is you create rules based on IP addresses, subnets, protocols, ports, things like that. So we've gone in and using our application awareness have made this a lot easier for you. We've got 3,000 signatures of different applications or functions of different internet-enabled applications and allow you to create rules based on that. So you can simply go in, instead of having to know ports and servers and things, you can simply go into your firewall rules and pull through your drop-down menu, select Facebook, and then choose to block Messenger or block video chat, et cetera, file transfers. And we do that for up to 3,000 different applications and behaviors. So a really easy way to create some really nice advanced firewall rules. And that's available on, I think, all of our firewall appliances. We also have a dedicated myzyxel.com portal for you. This portal allows you to keep track of all of your customers where you've deployed our security gateways and allows you to see the status of those licenses for those UTM services, making it really easy for you to stay on top of things and making sure you're keeping your customers and reaching back out to them to sell them new licenses as they expire. We also offer something called a virtual private cloud that works with Amazon Web Services. So as most of you know, more and more things are moving to the cloud, and a lot of those cloud services are being hosted by AWS. So with a VPC, you create a direct VPN from one of our VPN firewall appliances directly to the Amazon Web Cloud. So all of those web services, whether it's an Exchange server or what have you, appear to be on the local network as far as your users are concerned. So a great way of doing the cloud and offering additional security and keeping those resources from being directly web accessed. So now we'll talk briefly about ATP, Advanced Threat Protection, the new way of doing security. So this is showing here, I think this is animated. As we go through here, if we see a threat comes through your firewall, or we see some behavior that comes through your firewall, some packets or a type of sending packets that we don't recognize, ATP has the ability to take those packets, quarantine them, and upload them to the cloud where they're run through a bunch of virtual machines to try to determine the behavior. Once they've gone through, then we know we can categorize them as being harmful or not harmful. If they're harmful, they can then automatically push out configuration changes to everybody's ATP, not just your own, and let them know. Or if it's good stuff, we can push out to everybody and let them know, hey, this is good behavior, these are good files, packets, what have you. Go ahead and let them through. So with traditional UTM, you use signatures. So the signatures get updated periodically, in our case from Trend Micro and from Bitdefender, and they say, hey, these are the threats, these are the things, or these are the good stuff. And that's how the rules are applied. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff that primarily coming from zero-day exploits or new applications, new apps, that haven't yet been classified and pushed out via signature update. So those are unknowns. So that's where ATP steps in. ATP steps in to deal with not only the signatures for known good and known bad, but also specifically identifies and isolates these unknown files, behaviors, and then sends them up to the cloud to run through our sandboxing interface to emulate thousands of different computer configurations to see what is going on and what those things are, so we can categorize them as being good or bad. So it allows us to have much more aggressive behavior when it comes to unknown packets. You can choose to let them through or block them. And then once the cloud is able to identify if they're good or bad, we immediately push out the updates to all of everybody's ATP device. So as more and more customers use the ATP, the quicker and more responsive the cloud becomes, because you've now got more and more devices out there able to see new behaviors and identify them. So we'll talk here a little bit about the differences between the USG and the ATP. You can see the differences here as far as what's covered. ATP gives you access to cloud machine learning, or AI, which identifies new behaviors, new threats, sandboxing, zero-day IP and URL reputations. Gives you much faster throughput, significantly faster throughput going through for both IDP and UTM. It gives you a limited amount of SSL VPNs, where with the USG you can buy licenses to expand the number of SSL VPN connections allowed. But as you see, the ATP does not offer hotspot functionality, Facebook Wi-Fi, some of these other things here. So if you need those, you want to stick with the USG series. And then lastly, for security, we'll talk a little bit about reporting. If you're using a Nebula device, you use Nebula. It has some number of reports that are built in as part of the Nebula Pro Pack. For everything else, there is SecuReporter. It's a piece of software out there. I believe we're currently offering a free trial on it that you can use. And basically, it provides analysis, reporting, alerts, visualization of what's going on. So basically, it gives you a one-stop shop to see what's going on in your customer networks. It'll let you know, who's accessing these bad files, when they were coming in, et cetera, et cetera. So what kind of threat, who was targeted, when, who was the attacker, where was the attack from. So that's the type of information you can get, and this can be summarized and automatically output as various different types of reports for you. Moving on, we'll talk about Nebula. Now, normally when you talk to somebody on our sales team and they talk about Nebula, they're talking about Nebula Control Center. Technically, Nebula Orchestrator, our SD-WAN offering, is part of Nebula. They're two separate ecosystems, though, so it sometimes gets a little bit confusing. So we'll start by talking about the SD-WAN, the newer Nebula. So if you're familiar with SD-WAN, a lot of this is going to be repetitive for you, but if not, basically it's just as things go on here, we're seeing more and more connectivity between sites and between the cloud. And we'll skip through most of that. So let's talk about the fun features of it. So what does SD-WAN do? So SD-WAN is primarily being viewed as a replacement for an MLPS connection. So instead of having a dedicated connection that you're paying the telephone company a ton of money to create a dedicated connection between different sites, with SD-WAN you can do it over the public internet using IP infrastructure. So traditionally the problems with doing it over the internet is it's much slower than a dedicated connection. It's prone to interference and things like that. So SD-WAN is designed to solve all of that for you. So one of the first features we have with the SD-WAN functionality is something called WAN optimization. So this allows us to optimize the behavior, since we control the WAN on both sides or all sides of a cloud situation where you've clustered a bunch of different sites together via VPN. It allows us to kind of break the TCP rules and do some other stuff, which allows us to have much faster throughput. It allows us to deal with latency and reduce latency, optimize for packet loss, and a number of other things which dramatically increase the speed and the quality of your connection. We also have the ability to create and follow multiple paths between your different VPN connections. So we can monitor multiple VPN routes and automatically in real time shift packets from one route to the other route, ensuring that you're always getting the fastest possible connection over the VPN. And then lastly, in this scenario here, we've got three different VPNs sort of together in a star topology. One of the things we can automatically do is if we see the location in the UK wants to send some data down to the location in Italy, rather than relay it through the different hubs, it will automatically dynamically create a direct VPN connection between those two different locations to send the data, thereby speeding up the connection. So once you put all of that together, you see significant bandwidth improvements. So in this example here, we're going from Germany to Taiwan. So we're transferring a large file. It's Ubuntu ISO over FTP. So you can see by using traditional VPN connection between the two locations, it takes almost 3 minutes to transfer the file. However, when we use SD-WAN with WAN optimization, it only takes 10 seconds to send the same file. Honestly, with these bigger, longer VPN tunnels over the public internet, WAN optimization makes a huge difference. It's fantastic not only for transferring large files, but if you're doing VoIP between locations or you're using a server-hosted voice PBX, dramatic differences due to the ability of reducing the amount of loss, reducing the amount of jitter, and reducing latency between locations. It's fantastic. In addition, the Nebula Orchestrator also makes it easier for client-based VPN. So when someone's trying to remote in using their work laptop from a hotel or from their house, we work with the automatic built-in VPN clients on Windows and Mac and iOS, so there's no additional software that you need to buy. It works with what's built in on the OS, and we dramatically simplify how easy it is for the user to configure the laptop and connect back in to the hub. So Orchestrator is available in two flavors. There's a free version and there's a paid version. So all the fun stuff that speeds up your WAN optimization, stuff like that, that all requires a license. If you're just using it to just make it a little bit easier to use the cloud to create auto VPN tunnels between locations, the free version will work just fine for that. Okay, so now we'll talk about Nebula Control Center, NCC, which is what you probably are more familiar with when it comes to the Nebula terminology. So Nebula is essentially our version of what Cisco Meraki offers. Managing your network in the cloud, moving all configuration to a cloud-based interface. And the idea behind this is to save you some money. So as we go through this animation here, slides that are green are areas where you're saving money or time when doing your setup and configuration. Puzzle pieces that are gray are where we've essentially completely eliminated something you would traditionally need to do on a network. So obviously to begin, you need to buy your hardware. That's pretty much the same. Installing software or hardware, now is where it gets a little bit easier. There is no local configuration required in most applications. You simply plug in the hardware. So you don't need to send a skilled technician out on site to do the install. And in some cases, you may just be able to ship the hardware itself to your end customer and have them plug it in for you. You don't need to worry about monitoring protocols and figuring out how you're going to monitor these devices if you're offering to manage services to your customer. You don't need to worry about setting up port forwards or VPNs in case to get remote access to your customer sites. You can do remote management if something goes wrong. Our cloud interface, Nebula Control Center, can act as your monitoring platform, so you don't need a third-party monitoring software like SolarWinds or Zabbix. Although if you're already using those and you like those do work just fine with our Nebula equipment. You don't need some sort of dedicated storage space to store your syslogs and things like that, and Nebula handles that automatically for you. Pushing out configuration changes, firmware updates, things like that are all automated and simplified using the cloud. And then you've got your normal user and device management, so no effect there. But the end result is by using a Nebula type solution, it simplifies things, it saves you time, and it saves you money. So we'll talk a little bit about some of these individual things. So one of the first ones is all of our Nebula equipment has a QR code. It's available both on the outside of the box and on the hardware itself. So to assign a piece of equipment to your customer, all you do is scan that QR code in and say, this is going to my customer Bob, and this is going to his site on Main Street. After that, that's all you need to do. So in some cases, you can have the hardware shipped to your office, scan it in, assign it to your customer, and then ship it on out to the customer for them to plug in and install, or for an installer to go out on site and plug it in. Once the device has been plugged in, has access to DHCP and power, it will automatically reach out to the internet. It'll look into the cloud. The cloud will say, hey, this is Bob's hardware, and this is specifically being used at the Main Street location, and it'll automatically update firmware and then download the configurations that you've set up for that customer in that location. There's no additional hardware or software that needs to be bought, so there's no cloud keys, there's no dedicated wireless LAN controllers, there's no virtual machine images you have to get up and running somewhere. It's all hosted in Amazon AWS, and it's all automatic for you. Once everything's going, anywhere you've got access to a web browser where you can type in nebula.zyxel.com, you have access to all of your customers, all of their networks, all of their equipment. We also have a mobile app to be used for installers that lets you quickly keep an eye on what's going on, gives you some basic wireless LAN configuration, and if you're an installer, it gives you some other tools like the ability to photograph where you're installing the hardware and saving that on the cloud. So if someone has to go out on site months or years later, help them figure out, which switch it is that needs to be replaced, etc. So Nebula was designed from the ground up to make it easy to manage multiple customers and multiple sites under each customer. Admin access is granular, so you have a lot of flexibility. You can control which of your employees has access to which sites and what functionality they have access to. You can give the customer access to be able to view things but not change things. You can give the manager who works at location A access only to location A for viewing, but not to the other locations of the same customer, et cetera, et cetera. Tons of flexibility. When you log in, we've got our MSP view here, which shows you all of your customers and gives you a quick snapshot. Are they using the free version of Nebula, or are they using the paid version of Nebula? If paid, when does that expire? How many sites do they have? How many devices do they have? Which ones are online? Which ones are offline? From there, you choose your customer, and you'll get a similar sort of view showing you all of their different sites and the status of those sites. And then once you choose a site, we give you a dashboard showing you what's going on, how many wireless users there are, how much PoE budget's being used. And if you're using our security gateways, we'll tell you which specific applications are using bandwidth and which specific users are using your bandwidth. We make it really easy to jump between sites and customers once you're in this view. We also have an alternative version of this view if you're just using Nebula for wireless LAN management, which a lot of our customers only use Nebula for wireless LAN. That's fine. We've got a second view that just shows you wireless LAN information. So when you're looking at our price list, you'll see a couple different things. You'll see some products labeled as Nebula. These products only work with Nebula. Going forward here, almost everything, though, is Nebula Flex. So Nebula Flex is hardware that's allowed to be used in the traditional way and configured and set up as a traditional network equipment, or you can switch it into Nebula mode to be managed through the cloud. And then on our wireless side of things, we also have products that we're labeling Nebula Flex Pro. So these are specifically the access points that can be used standalone. They can be used with a wireless LAN controller, or they can be used with Nebula, and you can switch between all three modes. So let's talk briefly about licensing. The core Nebula functionality is free. This is probably the biggest difference between us and Meraki. We do not require licenses to use our Nebula cloud. If the license, there's no being locked out of your equipment, should you not renew your licenses, none of that. So the free version of Nebula, zero-touch auto-deployment, plug it in, and it works. Automatic firmware updates, unlimited number of users, unlimited number of devices, access to our captive portal functionality, access to all of your general configuration stuff. It's all there for you. Now, we do also offer a license called Professional Pack, which unlocks some additional features for you. It's aimed mostly at the MSP market or much larger customers. So one of the differences is an unlimited number of admin accounts, where with Nebula there's only 5 per organization. Automatic email alerts, so we can send you an email when we see an access point or switch goes offline for a certain amount of time. Let's see, what else do we got here? A year's worth of logs stored in the cloud versus only a week worth of logs stored in the cloud. An unlimited user database that can replace a Radius for doing your guest access authentication or Inno21X authentication. And just a lot of reports. If you need a lot of reports, you want to automatically send a report to your customers, we can do that, but you do need the Pro Pack. ProPack is available as either an annual license or a perpetual license. So either way there for you. And then also if you're using our gateways, the UTM services do require a license. That's the content filtering and antivirus. So any of our NSG gateways come with 1 year of the security services bundled with them. After that, you do have to buy a license for that, and that is separate from the professional pack. So it's possible to have a security gateway operating using the free version of Nebula and using the security pack for the UTM functionalities. Doug had a question for me. Let me see what this question is. Doug asks, can you set up an admin user in Nebula that allows that user access to only one site? So yes, absolutely. So you can set up an admin account that's just for one site, for one specific customer, absolutely. It's highly flexible on how you can configure that and can control that. So pretty much any way of controlling the rules or controlling access we can do. We also have a dedicated type of account for installers that really only allows them to add devices to an existing site. We also have another account type for if you're using this in like a hotel or at a office where you're providing guest access and you want each user to have their own unique username and password. We've got a type of account that can only generate new unique users and passwords for that guest network and has access to nothing else. So lots of granularity when it comes to how you set up the admin accounts and what they have access to. Moving forward, let's talk about wireless briefly here. So we've got a whole range of access points, but I want to talk about one of the things that people run into here. So let's give some examples. What are some problems people have? You've got a high density deployment where you've got lots of users. You've added some new access points, and yet performance isn't improving. You're using the school, you've got one access point per classroom, and yet you're still having issues with download speeds or the ability for the teacher to push out screen shares. You've added new access points using the new technology, but you're not seeing the performance you expected to see. Your wireless in your office isn't good enough to handle video conferencing, or you often have audio dropouts when you're trying to have a conversation. So what's the cause of that? Generally, the primary cause of those types of issues is something called co-channel interference. Basically, when it comes to Wi-Fi, you've got a limited number of channels that are available for all of your wireless devices, whether they're Wi-Fi enabled or not. Bluetooth, game controllers, et cetera, all of them are using the same 2.4 or 5 gigahertz spectrum. And you've only got a limited amount of room before they start stepping on each other's toes. On top of that, with Wi-Fi, only one device is able to transmit at a time, and they all have to take turns. So it's really easy for you to get into a situation where multiple devices try to broadcast at the same time. If you're in an office building where you've only got a certain floor or an office within that floor, you might be dealing with interference from your neighbors who are using the same channels that you're trying to use, et cetera, et cetera. So the traditional way of dealing with that is to try to turn the power down on the access points. So that works great provided you own the entire building or you own the entire hotel. Doesn't really help you if you're in an environment where you're having to deal with RF coming from your neighbors or interference coming from industrial devices such as the air conditioner up on the roof. But the other issue is yes, you reduce the interference, but at the trade-off of you negatively impact the signal-to-noise ratio, which can also lower your speeds as well. So smart antenna is basically the way of solving this. If you sell Ruckus products in the past, you're probably familiar with a lot of this, since they're probably the other biggest name out there that uses smart antenna technology. So with a traditional access point, you've generally got one of two ways of having the antenna configured. Either a nice circular coverage for a ceiling mount access point or directional coverage. With smart antenna, instead, you have literally hundreds and hundreds of different antenna configurations that the access point can use. And it can switch between those in real time. So the way ours are optimized is they look at where the client device is in relation to the access point, but they also look for other sources of RF interference. And then they go through those antenna patterns and find the one that's optimized, both to concentrate the signal at where your client device is and to allow them to ignore RF interference from other devices. And unlike beamforming, this works even when the user is mobile. It's able to track and follow where they are and change the antenna pattern as they move around. It does not require any software or anything special on the client device. Makes a huge, huge difference. So a couple years ago, the University of Brescia, their networking group, saw the claims that us and Ruckus make about smart antenna, so they decided to test it. They bought our equipment, they bought Ruckus equipment, they bought Cisco, and they bought Aruba. And they put them through a number of tests. You'll see a little link there. You can pull up their entire white paper where they documented all of their tests. But to quickly summarize it for you, our smart antenna access points in a real-world environment where there's co-channel interference, we're up to 70% less interference or less performance drop than those access points that do not have smart antenna technology. 56% better coverage than Cisco, who does not have smart antenna, and even better than Ruckus, with up to 45% better coverage, because we did a better job than Ruckus does at dealing with RF interference. And then lastly, I want to sort of talk about our access point construction. If you pick up one of our access points and you pick up a Ubiquity or even a high-end Ruckus, you will feel a significant difference in the weight, and there is a reason for that. So let's see here, let's get a laser pointer out. So one of the things you'll see on the back of the device is you will see a big giant plate of metal that most of our competitors don't have. What is that? It's a heat sink. It's designed to pull heat off the PCBA and vent it out the top of the unit. Why do we do that? Because when we're dealing with an access point, there's two major causes of failure in a solid state device, whether access point or whatever it is at solid state you've got. And one of those is heat fatigue. Heat fatigue causes solder joints to fail. So we have this big giant heat plate there to help remove that heat out of the device. The other thing you'll notice here is our capacitors are all solid state. So you don't have to worry about leakage or boiling over or drying out. That's probably the other most common cause of failure on a solid state device is capacitor failure. The next thing you'll see here is you'll see a lot more shielding on the PCBA than you see in our competitors. This is just that much more that we go through to reduce EMI, electromagnetic interference between the individual components. So that gives us a little bit of a boost in the signal-to-noise ratio. Doesn't make much of a difference when you've got a strong connection, but makes a huge difference on those sort of edge cases where you're right at the edge of your connection. It's the difference between a slow but stable connection and no connection, or a connection that's constantly up and down. The other difference you'll see here is we mount our antennas onto an RF shield that's mounted off of the PCBA. If you pull up on the Ruckus or Ubiquity or D-Link or Netgear, or Aruba, you'll find the antennas are mounted directly to the PCBA. So that increases the likelihood of EMI causing interference with the signal-to-noise ratio. Also, this big metal plate acts as a reflector to help boost signal noise. So takeaway, our access points are designed to last a really long time and to have just that much a little bit better performance for you. So all of our access points come with a lifetime warranty and lifetime support out of the box. Going forward here, in addition to nebula management, we also offer wireless LAN controllers. We've got dedicated hardware which can support up to 1,000 devices. We also offer wireless LAN controller functionality as built into our VPN, USG, and ATP series security gateways. So if you're using one of these guys, you don't need a separate box. If you want to use a local wireless LAN controller, that functionality is built into our security gateways. Switching. So switching gets confusing because we've got a lot of different switches out there. So most of what you will need to learn about the device itself, you can simply learn from our naming conventions. If you see ES as the beginning of the switch part number, it tells you it's fast Ethernet. If you see GS, it tells you all of the ports are gigabit speed. If you see XS, it tells you most of the ports are gigabit speed, but there are 10 gig uplinks. If you see XGS, it's telling you everything everything's 1 gig except for the uplinks, which are 10 gig. Sorry, the XS series is telling you that it can be up to 10 gig on all ports. And then the MGSs are metro switches. We don't really offer these in North America, but you may see them if you're browsing our global site. You'll see the model number, 1200 series, 1900 series, 2200 series, and then you'll see a dash followed by the number of ports, 24, 26, 28, 52. And then you'll see a P or HP. P tells you the switch supports 802.3 AF PoE. If you see HP, it tells you it supports 802.3 AT PoE. And then if you see F, it tells you all of the ports are fiber ports. So on the PoE side of things, we have an intelligent way of managing PoE. It's a little bit different than most of our competitors out there. So instead of using the classification system, we can intelligently monitor the device, realize how much power it needs, not just currently, but to boot up. And then we can automatically control and assign power based on that. So the takeaway here is it lets you put a lot more devices on a switch than you normally would be able to with the same power budget. So just to show you here in this example, 20 of our WAC 6502D-S access points. Based on the PoE classification system, they were classified as a class 4 device, which on a lot of other switches out there means it would automatically reserve 30 watts of power per access point. So in order to support 20 APs, you would need a 600 watt PoE power budget. With our intelligent PoE functionality here, we're able to realize those access points each only need 16 watts in real utilization. So instead, we'll only reserve 16 watts per access point, and now you only need a 320 watt power budget instead of a 600 watt power budget to support those 20 APs. Just showing here, we've got a lot of different switches out there with PoE power budgets, anything from 60 watts all the way up to a full kilowatt of power. So now let's briefly talk about the different switch series for you. So the 1200 series is our Soho smart managed switches, very basic web GUI for doing configuration. The 1900 series is more of our smart managed series, offering more functionality than the 1200 via web GUI. And then we've got the 1920 series, which offers pretty much full layer 2 functionality through a web GUI interface. These can also be managed via Nebula, as can our 1930s 10 gig switches. And then our 2200 series are very similar to the 1920s or 1930s, but these offer a CLI command line interface for those of you that like to configure things the Cisco way or like to use scripts and things like that. And then as we go up, we add more functionality, layer 2, light layer 3, layer 2 plus, all the way up to full layer 3. So I do want to talk about some new switches. We just launched them. The unmanaged version came out in July, I think. The managed version came out last month. These are switches that were designed from the ground up specifically for those of you doing IP cameras. Although some of the cool features in here are going to be usable for those of you that do voice or other sorts of networks. So let's briefly go through them. First thing is we have the ability to extend the range. Traditionally, Ethernet PoE is only able to do 100 meters. So we have a mode that does up to 250 meters at 10 megabit connection speed, works with any other vendor's product on the other end. So it doesn't require some sort of proprietary way of getting to 250 meters of range for both PoE and data. Continuous PoE, applying a configuration change, updating the firmware, having a fault in the switch itself, that causes the switch to reboot will not cause you to lose PoE to the connected device. PoE will continue to be pushed out while the switch reboots. We've got a nice web mode here that lets you see which devices are connected to the switch, which port they're on, how much PoE they're using, what their IP address is. It allows you to reboot them via power cycle through that web interface. So you just log into the switch to be able to see all that. You don't have to use a third-party piece of software or log into each device by itself. We also have an auto recovery mode. This can work by pinging the device or using LLDP to query the device to see that it's still functioning. You can set it up and it's fully configurable as to how many failures it registers before it decides the device needs to be power cycled to reboot it. And we can also configure here how long to wait once you've issued the reboot command before it begins checking the device again. So it gives you time. So you can say, okay, this device takes 3 minutes to reboot, so it knows not to keep rebooting the device every minute. It knows to wait at least 3 minutes before starting to query the device to see if it's back online. In addition to rebooting the device, it can also create an alarm event in the syslog for you. And then lastly, these switches are designed, oftentimes you're adding IP cameras to buildings and areas that were not designed for Ethernet connectivity. There's no wiring closet or dedicated area. So because of that, we've beefed up the operating temperature that these devices can handle. We've beefed up the electrostatic discharge and surge protection that these devices can withstand before having a failure. And we've also made some changes to how the fan is optimized so it doesn't create a lot of noise. So it's just a little bit of a heavier duty switch than you would normally find in our switch program. So that today concludes the hardware portion of the webinar. I've got one more slide for you talking about the partner program. If you're here today, you've probably already joined the partner program, so I won't talk about all the cool benefits you get as a partner, such as preferred access, an escalation to our tech support team, deal reg, automatic discounts through distribution, et cetera, et cetera. I'll just say check out our partner website, vars.zyxel.com, or go to the US website and then click over to partner. That's where we have a lot of information for you and links to make it easier for you to access those partner resources that you have as a partner. And with that, whoops, wrong direction. That concludes today's webinar. If you have any questions, go ahead and send them in now via the Q&A box. If there's something a little bit more detailed you'd like to talk to us, you can go ahead and email me directly. My email is up there on the screen. In addition, we are looking for your feedback. We've got a lot more webinars. We've got pretty much one webinar a week, at least, sometimes two, covering all sorts of different topics. We need your ideas of what sort of things you'd like training on, what sort of things you'd like webinars on. So let me know. Give us a call, talk to your salesperson, let them know what you're looking for. If you saw something today that's kind of interesting or you'd like more information on, give us a call. Talk to Sandy, Jacob, Ivan. Let them know, and they can get that information for you. Otherwise, thanks for joining us today, guys. Doesn't look like we've got any more questions coming in. If you're working on a question, go ahead and highlight it and copy it and email it to me instead, because I'm going to go ahead and end today's webinar. Again, thanks for joining us, and if you have any feedback, you have any suggestions for future topics, you have any suggestions for how to make this monthly webinar more valuable for you, we want to hear that from you. So reach out to us and share that with us. Thanks, everybody.